All right. So we're going to look at my SMART goals that I set for my class and some of the travails that I ran into trying to get them through this process. First thing I did was I set some criteria for the type of project I was going to do and what I wanted to accomplish through my SMART goal. I wanted to use something that would be useful to students in the future, some kind of skill that they would need later on. I wanted to use a commonly used format, something that was easy for them to write, and I wanted to promote civic engagement through it. So what I decided on was a persuasive formal business letter. This is something that students could use to argue an opinion, to address an opinion with some kind of figure of authority. I know as adults they'll probably be writing letters to the editor or writing a letter to their congressman, that type of thing. So I wanted to give them a little bit of practice at that as I went through the social studies class. And I wanted to use some primary source documents because the best way to form an opinion about something in social studies is to start with the primary sources and get into the mindset of the people who were putting out these primary sources. And through those, they would find some evidence that they would use to support their opinions. The goal states, for the current semester, my students will prepare for future civic engagement by improving their skills in writing persuasive letters that make evidence-based arguments to support their respective opinions. So what does improvement look like? This is actually a picture of the first rubric for the first assignment. I used a pretty basic format. I looked in the letters, I stated that I would look for proper grammar. I would look for proper business letter formatting. I would look at the clarity of their arguments and whether or not they used specific examples, if I can talk, from primary sources involved with the assignment. And I would look at their word count. And I used a 5-point scale for this. I didn't count each instance that they used these criteria, but whether they used them at all, whether they used them part of the time, or whether they used them all the time. The second assignment, I did pretty much the same thing. I did add a little bit of scaffolding in. I used more primary source documents for them to draw their opinions from, or to find more evidence to base their opinions on. Plus, I added a link to an online writing lab so that they could get a little more information about how to properly format the business letter, and a little bit more about the grammar as well. I did cut back the word count a little bit to try to encourage them to write a little bit more than they did the first time. The third assignment, I went into a lot more detail. I added some more supports and resources rather than simply giving them the link to the website that I used as an online writing lab. I actually put links directly to the pages that they would need. I took these pages and actually went over them in class with the students so that they would learn more about how to properly do a business letter, and how to formulate an argument. That was another big part of it. For this assignment, I actually, rather than having them turn it in hard copy, I had them turn it in through Google Classroom to try to make it easier for them to do and easier to turn in. That way too, with links to the pages I had gone over with them, they would have direct access to them with the assignment as well. There were some issues that I ran into. The class that I did this in, there's very low participation in homework assignments. This class has an excessive amount of absences. an excessive amount of tardiness. On a good day, there might be 2/3 of the class there. There's extremely low motivation to complete any assignment that's not done in class. There's a very low level of engagement with school in general with this class. And they have a tendency to game the system to try to meet the expectations that are placed on them. They used what I call white text in online documents. They would change the color of the text to white, and they would type random letters, spaces, to make it look like their word count was actually higher than it was. Then, until you highlighted it, they didn't show up. But once you highlighted it, you could see it's one of those little tricks they didn't quite think through. And a big part of it is grades are not an incentive to get them to do any kind of homework. I had kids that told me flat out, I don't care if I fail or not. And to be honest, I really didn't find a good way to overcome that. For the first assignment, each student was to draft a letter to one of Virginia's first members of Congress and give their opinion on why a Bill of Rights should or should not be added to the Constitution. And for their primary sources, they had some of the documents that are listed in the SOLs. They had to use proper grammar, stick to the word count. 2 out of 22 turned this assignment in. Student A wrote 101 words out of a 350 word minimum. Student B, 300 out of 350. Both were pretty well grammatically correct, used proper format. Student A ended up with an 80, student B with a 90 for their total score. I provided written feedback regarding the word count and corrected them on the grammatical issues I encountered. This is when I added to my original goal. My goal became after this just to get them to do the assignments. For the next one, I added some more supports, as I said before, and tried to make the assignment a little more achievable. I changed it. By this time, we were at the Civil War, so I did an argument whether or not Virginia should secede. Cut the word count back a little bit, made sure the due date was clear on it. This time I got 5 letters. A and B both turned theirs in, plus 3 more students. Student A improved, doing 233 words out of 300. Student B did as well, doing 290. Student A, however, used some of the white text I talked about earlier. She had, in the official word count, over 300, but when you took out the random letters she'd added, it cut it back to 233. Student A got up to an 82, student B to a 90. The other students ranged anywhere from 60 to 92%. I gave all of them feedback on their word count and the use of white text. Provided them all with feedback on grammar and on how to form an evidence-based argument. The lowest scoring student received feedback on formatting and following directions, as she did not use much evidence and had only 79 out of 300 words. For the third one, I added a couple more supports. I used the same writing lab links that I used before, but I modeled business letter formatting for them in person and how to do how to form an evidence-based argument. I provided them examples of letters to the editor, and this one in particular was to be a letter to the editor on the Scopes monkey trial, and they had to argue whether or not they supported the teaching of evolution or not in the public schools. Again,